The goal of this video is to demonstrate how to set up your vendors to process electronic payments and then generate a test ACH file to send to your bank for approval. Follow this procedure to set up your vendors' banks so that you can pay them electronically. Before you begin, gather information about your vendors' bank accounts, including the account numbers and the routing transit numbers. To set up your vendors' banks for ACH electronic payments, you would first select Accounts Payable, Main Menu, and then go to Vendor Maintenance. Select the vendor that you want to set up. In this case, we will select the very first vendor, 01 Airway. The first thing we would do is select the electronic payment box there and put in the standard entry class. This usually coincides with the entry class we did when we set up the ACH maintenance. In this case, it was 200. After that, click on the More button and go to Electronic Payment. The system will ask you if you want to save the changes that you've made already. You select Yes for that. The next thing that shows up is the Vendor Electronic Payment window. Here we can put in the vendor's bank account or accounts. They could have multiples, the routing transit number, what type of bank account, checking or savings. Optionally, you can put in a bank description. And we can also, if we are going to have multiple bank accounts, which is rare, tell it that you want a % of the net amount to be distributed to the banks. In this case, we're not. We're going to say 100% is going to this bank account. The next field is pre-note sent box. Your options here are no, yes, and approved. Note, the pre-note sent and pre-note date fields will be automatically updated when the pre-note selection register and pre-note approval registers are updated. If your bank does not require a vendor pre-note, select approved for the pre-note sent field and then select pre-note date that is 10 days prior to generating a test file or going live. If a pre-note is required by the bank, please see Generate Pre-Note ACH file in the Sage Help, as this subject will not be included in this video. We will put approved and we will have a pre-note date of 4/1/2020. Click Accept to save the changes in the vendor payment window and then click Accept to save the vendor information and exit out of vendor maintenance. You can now process a test ACH file to get bank approval. We will be using check and electronic payment maintenance to first create an electronic payment. We will need to create an electronic payment for at least one vendor, update the check and electronic payment register, and then generate the ACH test file. Once this file is created, we can then send it to your bank for approval. We will show you an example of a typical ACH file when we are finished. Be prepared to repeat this procedure multiple times before obtaining final bank approval. First, go into Check and Electronic Payment Maintenance and create an electronic payment. Proceed as follows. We'll go into Check and Electronic Payment Maintenance. We will select the vendor that we set up for electronic payments, which is Airway Property, and put in entry number 1. Note the electronic payment box is checked because we have set this vendor up for that. We'll now select the invoice that we wish to pay. We will select this invoice for $1,750. Displayed is the invoice date and the invoice due date. We will now accept this and exit. We will next go into check and electronic payment processing. We have to do this to create a vendor's electronic payment remittance advice before we can update the electronic payment registers. So we will select electronic payments from this screen here. The next screen is the electronic payment remittance advice printing. We will put in an effective date. We'll enter 5/31/2020. That is the effective date that the funds will be released, and a starting remittance advice number. We'll now go ahead and preview the electronic payment remittance advice. This is a typical electronic payment remittance advice that would go to a vendor. You can see here the name of the vendor. You can have their address in there. And notice the check number starts with the letter E and the number we said to start with. You can see the electronic payment bank account number, the date, the invoice, and the amount paid. Note, when processing live ACH payments, the remittance advice will be printed and sent to the vendor in lieu of a physical check. This process could be further automated by using paperless Office module to create the remittance in a PDF and optionally send out via email to your vendors. However, this will be a subject of another video and not demonstrated today. The next step is to print a check and electronic payment register. We will preview this register and update. We will use 5/31/2020 as the posting date for today. And notice there's an electronic payment comment automatically inserted there. We'll now preview the register. Here is the check register. Again, note the check number is E01000 and the amount is $1,750. The next thing the system asks is if you want to print the electronic payment register. And yes, we will do that. Note the electronic payment register. It gives us the register number and the comment of electronic payment with that payment comment. You can see the bank code, the bank account number, and the routing transit number for the bank. And here is again the check number, the bank account number, and the routing transit to the vendor that's being paid. It will now ask us if we want to update the check and electronic payment registers, and we will say yes. Now the next step is to generate the ACH file. You would simply go to the check and printing and electronic payment menu and go to generate ACH file. You would select the bank, which is bank code A in this case, file code to use this run. Typically this is the date, the effective date, so we'll put in 05/31. And we'll let the default of only batches never transmitted. And since we've only got one electronic payment in there, we will default to all here for both the effective date and transmission date. Click on proceed and it will process the ACH file for us. I will now go to the file location previously set up and view the generated ACH file. Go to the ACH files folder, and there you can see the ACH file. It has an extension of ACH, but it's essentially a text file. We can view this file by using Notepad. Here you can see the structure of the file and how it was set up. I will not go into detail for all the fields, but typically this is what the actual file will look like. The header information here, and then the actual vendor information here. And in this case, there was a debit record set. Again, this is a text file, so this file should be placed and kept in a secured network location. You may want to consult with your IT department or IT network consultant to set the network rights for the required user. Finally, send this to your bank for approval and be prepared to possibly repeat this again depending upon the response you get from your bank. This process alternately could be performed in a copied test company and then the setup repeated in your live company. However, we usually recommend doing this in your live company and then use electronic payment reversal feature and manual check entry to reverse the test and recall the invoice used. The next video will demonstrate how to actually process an electronic payment and print a physical check in the same check run. Thank you again for your attention.